Hi, welcome to this intro to Madness 16. My name is Scrage, and I play a lot of Across the Obelisk, and specifically Madness 16 Adventure Mode, which is the hardest way to play Adventure Mode. I really enjoy playing at this harder difficulty. I think it's a lot of fun. There's a big challenge to it, a lot of sort of theory crafting and thought going into how you can win and what you need to do to get the win. So each week I'm releasing new videos on how to do that with specific comps, but today we are going to look specifically at what Madness 16 does to change the game. How is it harder, and what are the different levels, and how does that all go? So to get started on that, let's take a look in the game. So this is just the opening screen. If you go to Adventure Mode and click here, I think it's after your first win you can then start changing the madness levels. Each of these levels increases the difficulty. To unlock these levels, you have to win on the previous level. So it'll start moving up and getting more and more difficult over the course of the course. Like as you are unlocking these, it'll get harder and harder. And then there's these corruptors on the side, which each add an extra madness level. And these are sort of pick your poison. You get to just pick which ones of these you want to play with and which ones you don't. I know that there are some people who play on Madness 14 or Madness 12, just sort of depending on what they feel like at the time. So feel free to sort of, if you're having trouble with one of these, it's always fine to just remove that and try to get your win there. For me and my content, it's always going to be on Madness 16, and that's just what I enjoy playing. So that's how you sort of get to the higher madness levels, and we can skip this. I just wanted the music going. Okay, so let's get into what these different levels actually do. So the first madness level that we are going to be talking about, and these are going to be like, I'm basically talking about Madness 16 in general. These different levels, as you saw, come at different points in the madness charts. So some of these are early on. This is the very first madness corruptor, or madness level. It will unlock this one, but it's not all going to be in order. So you'll sort of see as we go along. But the first change that the game makes is that monsters are stronger and their abilities are improved. So you can see here on the right, the lower down set of skills. When you're first playing the game, each enemy basically uses one ability each turn. And as you turn on this madness level, they start doing two abilities, and they're harder, so they're improved. So in this case, you can see like they each are doing two abilities. The bite in the original version just deals the damage, and then in the madness level it starts adding bleed. And same with these other ones, the little screams they do, the shouts, they start adding insane to your team. So a lot of that changes, and this is I think this makes the game much more fun, just playing on this first level. So if you've never tried Madness, definitely try this. It's very enjoyable. I think the sort of additional skills that they start doing are really great. And I haven't played on the base version in a long time, so this is pretty simple, but sort of makes the fights more interesting and engaging. So that's the first thing that happens. As you level up, these things start taking place. So hero starting energy goes down to -2. So you start with 4 energy instead of 6. This one's pretty huge. The starting energy that you have really determines what kind of cards are actually playable for you and which are going to be easy to use versus hard to use. So something like a Flame Strike, which costs like 7 or something, a mage card that costs a lot. You may be able to use that just fine in like without the reduction in starting energy. But once you get the -2 starting energy, it's going to be like a turn or two of not really casting much at all before you're able to use your Flame Strike. So basically, a lot of those cards get much worse. Now, there are some that are still very good. I use Ball Lightning all the time. I think Unholy Storm is very good. On someone like Maluka, that's a 6-cost card. There are plenty of like higher cost cards. I use Whirlwind a lot that you can use. Now, you are going to have to then have somebody else helping your character gain the energy to use it, or having cards in your deck that gain you the energy to use it in another way. So those are that is a pretty huge difference from the starting game. And then these other ones: max HP, monster speed, damage taken, monster damage done. These all sort of go up as you are leveling up the madness chain. So I think it's like each time you up the madness level, these start going up by like 5% or so. So capping out at this amount, and then the slashes here. So 40%, 50%, 60%, 65%. At Madness 16, these are the amounts that the enemies gain in each act. So in Act 1, enemies have 40% more health. Act 2, it's 50%, 60% in Act 3, and 65% in Act 4. For the max HP, it's not a huge difference. I mean, yes, or I guess it is a pretty big difference in that there are a lot of cards that just sort of deal a flat amount of damage for a fairly large amount of energy. And without this upgrade, then those cards are much better, right? Like you spend a bunch and your flat damage may be able to kill an enemy and get them out quicker. With how Madness 16 works, most of those flat damage cards are not nearly as good because of the higher health pools. Like Madness 16 enemies have much higher health pools than your normal enemies or in Obelisk Challenge, and so there's a difference in the cards and the ways in which you have to deal damage that comes from the HP and also monster damage taken. Monster damage taken is interesting because there are a lot of cards that multi-hit, and early in the game, before you're able to get any like damage buffs up, those multi-hits are quite a bit worse. Because they're often lower damage, but the monsters are then taking just flat 2 damage less, and then 3 damage in the later acts, and so some of those are a bit harder, or are a bit worse before you get your damage sort of buffs, right? Things like one thing in particular that I always notice is whenever I'm using like a poison dart in Madness 16, it almost never deals damage unless you have some sharp on you. The sort of physical damage, I am often not taking it on the characters that have the poison darts. So someone like a Gustav or with like shivs, like those end up just dealing no damage because they're just taking a flat amount of damage less, and they have some resistance, and so it ends up being negligible damage unless you have the damage traits. And so that's why the damage perks. The perks are pretty important. Like if you have a damage dealer, it's much more important to have those like flat damage perks in the earlier game for your character to actually deal damage. Monster speed is definitely something that matters. +2 in Act 1, +3 in the later acts. This used to be way more. It actually, they nerfed it a while back, which I really like. They changed it so that it, in the later acts, you were like never able to catch up to monsters. But now, like the fastest a monster goes on turn 1 is 23. So if you have a character that has speed faster than 23, you will always go first. But speed really helps in comps where you are trying to one-shot things, like really end the fights quickly. In compositions where you aren't trying to end as quickly. It's really about like being able to get your defenses up before the enemies go, or using your abilities before they get their sort of defenses going, and that kind of stuff that really matters. So it definitely matters, and it's harder with this to go before them. You really have to put some perks into it, or bring characters that are very fast, like Magnus or Andrin, that kind of thing. Monster damage done. I mean, this one is just like it's here. It definitely matters, but like I don't really notice it that much, just because it's how I've played for a long time, and it is just sort of a flat damage buff. Their multi-hit things will hit a lot harder. That's the main thing that you have to think about. Okay, so those are the flat sort of stat changes that you have to that are happening on Madness 16. Now for the economy changes. This is a pretty big one. The starting shards at 300 per hero. This is more than it used to be. There's a while where you would basically gain no gold. It was like 50 or 60. It was like 7. It was a very small amount per hero. Now it's at 300 per hero, which is nice. You have 1,200 shards and 1,200 gold without any talents at the beginning of a run. And so you do have to be spend those carefully to get what you'd like. And a couple of things that are sort of that you might be used to if you haven't played Madness 16 or higher Madness levels. You can't use the supply exchange, so you can't sell your supplies for extra gold and shards. You are limited on the number of rerolls you use. I honestly very rarely use rerolls, so this doesn't really affect me much. We'll skip over harder event rolls. I'll come back to that and why it's here in a second. It also then reduces the uncommon cards available in the first town, or I guess at all, by one. So you can only have by one of each uncommon card, which definitely matters. It affects how you build your decks. There are a lot of uncommon cards that are very good that you can only grab one of now, that you would for sure grab multiple of if they were available. And then rare cards are disabled in the starting town, and epic cards are disabled in the second town. So this is just so that it sort of limits what you can actually do damage-wise and in Act 1. One specific one that I always think of is in Act 1 you cannot buy electrodynamics. I think that's what it's called, for mages. If you could get that in Act 1, you could just it's such a powerful damage card that you could definitely just plow through a bunch of Act 1 fights if you could. Also, something like Ballad of Evasion on Scouts is a very good card that is not available in Act 1 that would help a lot if you had access to it. Those are very expensive, but you would definitely consider using them. And then, yeah, epic cards. There's some epic cards that are unavailable until Act 3, things like Whirlwind, like Sanctuary. Those kind of things are not available until the third act town. And then you have harder event rolls, and those are just when you are going to a node, right? If there's a chance for something to happen, right, it's going to be a much harder time actually activating that requirement. So if it's, I don't know the exact numbers on all of these, but if it's you need to get a 4 or higher normally, it's now a 6 or higher that you have to get with your cards from your deck. And so you'll notice as I'm going through Madness Acts, I don't often take some of these event rolls, just because a lot of them on Madness 16 are impossible to do. It's you have a 10% chance, and if you lose, you get curses in your deck that are awful. And so that is or injuries in your deck that are awful, that really hamper your run. So you'll see me skipping a lot of those. There are some that are definitely doable and that I do take, but that is something that will reduce the number of shards and sort of gold that you can get across the run too. And then there's Poverty. This is one of the corruptors that's available, and what it does is reduce the gold and shards that you acquire by 50%, which is a huge deal, right? Basically, anytime you would gain shards or gold across anywhere in the game, then you're gaining half that amount, which is wild. This is one of the more recent corruptors they have introduced. Back in I think one of the reasons they did this is before, when you're in Act 2 and 3, you had so much gold and shards that you really could just do whatever you wanted. There wasn't really, you would buy everything, and it became like Act 2 and 3 were really simple because of that, because you had so many shards, so much gold, and it was really easy to get through to Act 2 and 3, because you were like really powerful from the stuff you could buy. Now with the poverty, it is much harder in Act 2 and 3. Like basically, in the past, it was, if like before this existed, you could really just get through. Like if you got through Act 1, you were like, okay, well now I'm cruising until Act 4, and then it'll be hard again. And now it's like pretty consistently difficult. There are a lot of fights in Acts 2 and 3 that are very hard, and this definitely contributes to that. And then one thing that I didn't have in here was that they're deadly injuries. So any injury you get, it will be a worse version of that injury. So like your death stores are pretty brutal. I think if we go to, let me go to the setup here, and I think we can show you in the Tome of Knowledge. Injuries. So you see that there is these different versions of Death's Door, right? And this is the one you get when you... Oh, wait, is this the one? No, it's this blue one, I think. And oh, is it? I actually am not. I guess it is. Huh. Oh, yeah. The decay falls off the end of turn. Okay. So yeah, you basically get these harder, worse versions of your injuries. Things like Death Doors are much worse. The things like Cold Feet are like, instead of exiting your deck the first time you draw it, it's now going to stay in your deck. The Broken Bones, it then also slows you, and you get a bunch of vulnerable. So these become much worse, and you need to get them out of your deck like as soon as possible. And so yeah, that's another change. Okay, and then so after your economy changes, we have exhaust. This is one of the earlier things that starts, I think. And basically what exhaust is when you reshuffle your deck during your turn, so after your initial draw phase, your cards start costing more energy. So when you draw them or when you return them from your discard. And so the first one you, like the first draw out of that section of your deck will cost 1 more, and then the second one will be 2 more, the third one will be 3 more, and it just continues to go up from there. So basic, like in this hand, you can see I have repetition trainings, I have bluffs. This, in a normal circumstance, would, if you had like a reduced cost bluff and you had 2 of them, you could just cycle through those infinitely and deal as much damage as you wanted, if you had a small enough deck. And so basically this exhaust mechanic prevents you from doing that. You are not able to go infinite. You're just not allowed to, and it does make change sort of a little bit of how you build your decks. Like if there were infinites in the game, then I would definitely be aiming for those at the end of their runs. But with this, you can't, and it does make it so that having a slightly larger deck is sometimes advantageous. Like if you have extra draw coming, if you just draw your cards and then and you have like a bluff in your hand, then the thing that you get back is already costing more. Where if you had a larger deck, then it wouldn't be affected. So that definitely changes like a lot of how you are actually planning on winning the run, and yeah, so definitely something to consider if you haven't played Madness 16 before. And then moving on, we have the further corruptors. So you have Impending Doom, which means that each character dies at the end of their their turn on the 8th round. If you are getting to the 8th round on Madness 16, then you're already in trouble. You really need to be getting a bunch of shards and gold from the rewards, and ending on turn 4 or so is where I normally aim. Like, if I can't end by turn 4, then I feel like it's going really slow, right? And it feels like we are going to have a hard time. And so Impending Doom normally doesn't affect my runs. Occasionally it will. I have won a run where I had somebody live, or somebody end the fight on the very final turn of Impending Doom. So like 3 characters had already died to it, and the last one was able to win. So that has happened. But if you're normally getting there, then you're already in trouble. The next one is Restricted Power, and this one is probably the biggest change in, like, if Restricted Power did not exist, Madness 16 would be pretty simple. Like, there were a lot more ways of actually just stacking a ton of a specific type of aura or curse and ending that way, right? You can just stack it infinitely, and you don't really need to consider much else past that. And so if you want to play, like, if you want to try Madness 16, or Madness 15, and without Restricted Power, I think there are a lot of interesting ways that you can actually end fights and win. I may do a run sometime of Madness 15 without Restricted Power on, and just show some of the wild things you can do, because there's like some like there's a card that doubles your block, right? Normally when I'm playing, I don't ever use it, because doubling my block up to 400, it's like I can get up to 400 without doubling my block, but it's just gonna cap there, and then the double really isn't doing anything. But if you can double past that, then it's pretty wild, the damage numbers you can get. And so, pretty different with that. You really have to consider, okay, what is gonna do enough damage to get me through. And then Resistant Monsters, this one is pretty simple. All monsters just have 10% higher resist, and then your vulnerable stacks are capped at 6. Yeah, so just everything's tougher. Sort of along the lines of the flat buffers, the flat number increases from the earlier section, but this one is in the Corruptor section, so we're talking about it here. Past that, Overcharged Monsters, +1 to Rs and Curses. The biggest, on Madness 16, the aura / curse that is the biggest deal is Silence. There's a siren that, one of the sirens that is one of the corrupted monsters, the champion monsters that we're going to talk about next, is called Lana. And Lana silences your whole team. Normally, without this Overcharged Monsters on, it's for 1 turn, which is, like, manageable if you're a bunch of spellcasters. But if it's at 2 turns, then you really start having trouble. If you're going 2 turns without any of your spellcasters dealing damage or healing, it can be really difficult to deal with. So that's, like, something you really need to consider. Obviously, all of the things they're doing to themselves. Sometimes there's monsters that give mitigate. That's one of the big ones, where instead of giving 2 mitigate, they're now giving 3 mitigate, and then 3 mitigate to 4 mitigate, and then that can stack up really fast and can be pretty dangerous in some fights. So those are things to consider. Not a huge, like, change outside of those. Getting, like, 1 more burn, like, it's not that big of a deal. Getting 1 more vulnerable is a little bit more, 1 more slow. Those kind of things are a little bit more than just, like, hey, 1 more shock or 1 more burn. Not a huge thing on some of them, and then huge on others. the random combats, I love random combats. I think if you are wanting to just try out a corruptor to make the game more fun, random combats is the perfect thing to do. It's makes it so that each combat that is not like a sort of story node is a random set of enemies that are according to that sort of the level you're at the time. So there are different like sort of tiers of enemies that you can get through the first set of fights, and then about halfway through Act 1, you then ups the level of enemies that are able to spawn, and then sort of in Act 2 and 3 and 4 and so on, it just enemies like the sets that are shown to you are sort of getting progressively harder. Each of the combats also has a champion enemy that is immune to one type of curse. So you can have burn immune enemies, you can have wet immune enemies, you can have dark immune enemies. Like any of the curses they can be immune to, so you do need to diversify your damage type. If you're relying only on burn, then you could be in trouble. If you're relying only on dark, then you could be in trouble. And so sort of giving multiple options for your damage types really can help if you run into an enemy that is immune to your main damage type. And then finally, Despair is one that is pretty interesting. Despair makes it so that your enemies use enchantments and so they add something on that then when they are hit, then they do an action, or when they hit you, they do an action, or when they block, they do something. Like, it can be all sorts of different things, and these are fun. I like them. I think it's sort of interesting. It makes the combats much more the things you're doing in combats and things you have to pay attention to in combats. It just increases that and tends to bring some really fun stuff to the combats. One of the hardest ones of these, if you ever run into the Siren puts up a sonar enchantment on themselves. So whenever they take damage, they give you 4 mark and 2 vulnerable, and it has 3 charges. And so you end up just like, if you're not careful, sort of killing your whole team by hitting into that over and over again. And so that's one of the hardest ones, but there are a bunch of other ones that are sort of more simple, more interesting, where you're playing around them. And so yeah, Despair's pretty fun. I enjoy it, and yeah. So I think people have asked me like how I come up with comps and what I'm considering. This is a lot of the things that I consider when building my compositions for the videos I post and the ones I just do in my free time or whatever. Though I don't have enough free time to actually play other outside of videos, so yeah. So yeah, this is sort of what I'm considering when I'm putting together a comp for Madness 16. So the first part is, what is my damage in general, and is that going to finish the non-boss fights by turn 4? If you're not like close to turn 4, so like 3 on the one side or 5 on the other, obviously you can go quicker, that's fine. But if you're going too far past turn 4, then it's going to be pretty hard to get enough shards and gold and enough good rewards to actually win runs. And so that's sort of my baseline. Like, most of the comps that I build and put together, you should be able to kill all the enemies by the end of before the end of round 4. Whether it's like the burn and chill setup that I had, or if it's stacking insane and poison like I did, and that kind of stuff, like all should be able to do it by turn 4. And then I guess the next thing, how am I staying alive? Like, what is my defensive stat? Who's doing it? How am I doing that? It is much harder to Oh, okay. Sorry. I realized I didn't talk about one of the corruptors. Let me switch. When I was just talking about having to stay alive, I must have just missed putting it in my list. Let's go over here, and exit out of here, and I can show you that. So we talked about all of these. The one we didn't, somehow missed, was Decadence. And Decadence has all heroes receive or have -3 healing done, -25% healing received, and Vitality only provides 50% of the max HP gained. And so this really changes how you are healing your characters, right? So if you aren't bringing the healing perks, your heals basically heal for nothing. It's like a base heal is healing for like 5 or something instead of the normal 8 that it would have, and or even less because the character gets -25% healing received. So it changes a lot of how you are trying to heal. You'll notice one thing that isn't included here is the regen. I am not 100% sure whether the -25% healing received affects regen, but so regen is pretty good. It is sort of a way to help early on in fights and whatnot. So that's like one of the things that you should be considering. So back to this. So with that in mind, how am I staying alive? Like, you do need to focus. Usually I have 2 characters that are specifically focused on like keeping everyone alive, whether it is a tank blocking, whether it's Otis giving shields, Maluka and Tholes, or Maluka and Gustav giving regen, or Maluka with vitality, one of the scouts with evasion, or just straight up healing like somebody like Reggie would do. Definitely all viable things, but you do have to consider like who is it, and how are they doing? I guess Nez with just his passive healing is another way. But usually I have 2 characters very specifically focused on keeping everyone alive. And then lastly, what is my scaling late game damage? There's a difference between just like what is my normal damage and what's my late game damage. Sometimes it's the same, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, I'm putting a bunch of wet on the enemies, and that is sort of how I am winning early game and late game. That isn't always the case. Like, I have a run with Tholes carry where in the late game he's stacking a bunch of stealth and then like one-shotting people with his using in Venom, what is it called? The deal damage based on the amount of poison on them. It's a skill, and you can use it out of stealth, and so it then just deals a ton of damage that way. Or am I switching somebody's damage type to the type that I'm doing? So am I getting Frost Axe for Yager, like a recent build that I did? And so that is obviously something that's changing partway through the run. So I know there are some runs where I have somebody doing a bunch of my early game damage, but then they change into a sort of supportive unit later in the run, and they're helping somebody else do the late game damage. And so those are sort of the things that I'm considering when I'm putting comps together. And I think that sort of goes over all of the differences between normal adventure mode and Madness 16. And I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions about all of this setup, then let me know, and I will happy to answer your questions in the comments, and happy to chat about whatever stuff that you like, questions about like, hey, like what am I doing wrong? What am I like? Where am I getting stuck? Like here, let me know, and I can see if there's anything I can suggest. So thanks so much for tuning in, and definitely subscribe to my channel if you want more content focused around Madness 16. I'm always trying to come up with new stuff, and I'll be doing more of these sort of explanation videos in the future, and yeah, we will be back with more.